D and Davis Show right here on ChicagolandSportsRadio.com. Dial us up 312-564-7375. And right now we have on the line, very glad to have her too, Kathryn Tappen of NHL Network. Kathryn, you there?
I'm there, yeah. Thank you for having me on.
No problem at all. Now, we're here in Chicago. So, you know, we have our beloved Chicago Blackhawks wrapping up the season real quick. But let's go right into it. They haven't looked the best this season. You had Taves go out. You had Kane go out. But, you know, they had Lower Stanley Cup here in Chicago. Hopefully we can keep it here. But what are your thoughts on the Blackhawks going into the NHL playoffs this year?
Well, I think obviously there was concern after last night's game for many Hawks fans, but I wouldn't even rule that a major concern overall big picture. I think, you know, the Blackhawks are going to be ready to go when the playoffs start next week, and it looks like Kane and Taves will be ready to go as well, hopefully at the start, whether it's St. Louis or Colorado next week, whoever the Blackhawks face. But I don't, you know, listen, they are so well coached. They've been there before. They're going to be healthy going into the playoffs, hopefully, with those two guys coming back. So I don't see major concerns for the Blackhawks. I think, I mean, this is just the last couple of games have just been, you know, they're 5-5-0 in their last 10, but at the same time, they've been resting a couple guys. They've had a couple injuries. I mean, Duncan Keith sat out the game the other night to get some rest. So certainly, you know, they're in a good position. Corey Crawford will probably get the rest here today against Nashville, and he'll be ready to go next week. So I don't really see any concerns for Chicago. I mean, they know what they're doing. They're the guys that are supposed to be playing well. I mean, Patrick Sharp's been stepping up huge. You've got Shaw and Saad and those guys playing well also. So I think that they're going to be just fine when the playoffs begin next week.
Hi, Kathryn. This is Sid the Kid. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Good. Thank you very much for doing this for us. If you're Coach Q right now of the Blackhawks, which opponent do you want to play here in this first round, Colorado or St. Louis?
Well, pick your poison, I guess. I mean, I guess the likely answer would be St. Louis. They haven't been playing very well, but at the same time, you know, St. Louis has been all season one of the best teams in the Western Conference. So I don't know that you want either one of them. I think for the Blackhawks case, I think they just have to focus on their own game. Colorado's had an unbelievable season, and they may clinch that Central Division title. But they're young. They're inexperienced in the postseason, so maybe that plays into Chicago's favor because they aren't inexperienced in the playoffs. But, you know, both goaltenders are good. Semyon Varlamov has been unbelievable, so he will be a very difficult goaltender to face if they play the Avs. And on the other side, you've got Ryan Miller, who came to St. Louis and has been unbelievable for the Blues and will most likely be looking to lead that team down the stretch there in the postseason. So Coach Q, he'll never tell you one way or the other. I think, you know, it's pretty obvious that both St. Louis and Colorado are two of the best teams out west. They wouldn't be in a playoff position if they weren't. So I think Chicago's main focus is just going to be on themselves and focusing on their strengths in their own game and facing those two opponents.
Hey, Kathryn, this is Davis. Quick question. Still here with the Chicago and the Blackhawks. Do you think Crawford is going to be able to turn it on? I know these last couple of games he's kind of turned it on. Do you think he's going to be able to hold up and lead us back to the Stanley Cup championship this year?
Yeah, well, I guess that's the plan, right? I mean, I think he would say so, absolutely. There were always question marks around Corey Crawford up until Game 6 of the Stanley Cup playoffs last year, Stanley Cup final, I should say, last season. So many doubters, and yet there he goes. He leads the team to the Stanley Cup victory in Boston. So I think that, you know, there's always going to be this question mark around Corey Crawford, and I don't know why. He's been unbelievable. He's been a little shaky the last couple games, but at the same time, you know, it's been uncharacteristic for Chicago the last couple games with how they've played. But I'm not worried about Corey Crawford at all. I think once he gets in that playoff hunt, you're going to see the way he performed last season as well, and he's hoping, just like every other player on that Hawks team, to make it back to the Stanley Cup final.
D and Davis Show right here on ChicagolandSportsRadio.com. 312-564-7375 is the number. Talking a little hockey right now with Kathryn Tappen of NHL Network. Kathryn, I must say, with the realignment, that was kind of a shakeup to the league, of course. But I must admit that the Western Conference is going to be unbelievable when it comes to the playoffs. Coming up, you got Minnesota right now. Looking at it right now, you got going against Colorado. You have Dallas and Anaheim. You have the Sharks. The Sharks out there going against the Kings. Have you seen a year where one of the conferences this loaded going into the playoff season?
I mean, last season, a little bit out west. The West always seems to be more dominant than the East, but this year, like you said, I mean, it's anyone's game out west. You look at the Anaheim Ducks, who have been incredible, and they're going to look to take over the top spot in the Western Conference tonight. San Jose, LA, I love that matchup. That is going to be an absolute battle between those two teams, two physical teams with highly skilled forwards, just star power all over the ice in that one. And it's unfortunate that one team of that series is going to be out after the first round because they're just so much fun to watch. Dallas, I love what they've done, the way they got in last night, the youth on that team, the chemistry between Ben and Sagan. I mean, you look straight up and down 1 through 8, and it is just complete dominance out west. Every single team is good. Great goaltending on every team out west that's in the playoffs. It's going to be really fun to watch. I mean, the East, obviously, you got great teams in the East, but they're just not quite as big and strong. I mean, Andrei Kopitar, the LA Kings, comes to mind. Joe Thornton of the San Jose Sharks. Just big players. David Backes in St. Louis. Those are going to be great series to watch out west, and I'm very curious to see what pans out. I mean, I know you guys in Chicago are hoping the Hawks go to the Stanley Cup final, but it is going to be a very difficult 4 rounds for them.
I know the Hawks were somewhat underhand with Taves and Kane going down, but do you think the Hawks should have bought Teuvo Teravainen over since they sent him back to Rockford right now? Do you think they should have left him overseas or brought him over now since he's probably not going to be on the playoff roster?
Well, I think they do a great job. I think Sam Bowman and company do a great job knowing when the players are ready to come over. He's a great player, and I think the sooner you get those guys overseas to come here, we saw it last year with the Bruins with Carl Soderberg coming over late in the season and then made a Stanley Cup final run with the Boston Bruins, and now he's been great this year for them. I think the sooner you get their feet wet, if they're ready to go, and these guys recognize when they're playing overseas, the management group in Chicago is well aware of what he's achieved over there and whether or not he's ready to come over. I think that he'll be fine, and the more reps he gets in Chicago or in Rockford, the better, because then he'll be ready to go. If it's not this postseason, it'll be next season, and Chicago certainly can use the depth. As they've shown the last couple games, the depth of their younger players has been huge in the absence of Kane and Taves.
D and Davis Show, ChicagolandSportsRadio.com, talking to Kathryn Tappen of NHL Network. Sid had another question for you, Kathryn.
Hi, Kathryn. This is Sid again. I want to jump into the Eastern Conference right now. Do you think that the East is Boston Bruins' playoff run to lose? And if it is, who do you see challenging the Bruins to come out the East?
I do. I personally think the Boston Bruins are – I think they're the team that the Western Conference is looking at as well for a potential matchup in that Stanley Cup final. Now, listen, anything can happen. You can run into a hot goaltender. Carey Price, for example, in Montreal can steal a series or two. But I think the biggest competition for Boston, believe it or not, is Philadelphia. I mean, Philadelphia, to me, is scary right now. They are clicking. They've got everything together. Craig Berube's done a great job with that team. Claude Giroux is playing well. Scotty Hartnell's playing well. Their goaltending, as you guys know from seeing Emery last year, and Steve Mason's been great for them as well. So I think Philadelphia, we saw the game last Sunday, or 2 Sundays ago, I think it was, between Boston and Philly took it to the Boston Bruins. I think they match up in size, physical play, offensive scoring, goaltenders. Tuukka Rask I'd probably give the upper hand to, but at the same time, Philly's pretty darn good in net as well, which you don't usually hear over the years of the Philadelphia Flyers. So I think Philadelphia would be the team to watch against Boston, but at the same time, the Detroit Red Wings will most likely, as they are positioned right now, play the Boston Bruins in the first round, and Detroit plays their game. They're one of the few teams that doesn't play Boston's game when they play them. We notice a lot of teams coming in and facing the Bruins, and they try and play the same style as the Bruins, and they get caught. Detroit plays their own game, and they are dangerous offensively, and they're just so smooth, and veteran leadership on that team keeps them going in the playoffs, as we've seen 23 consecutive years. So I'd say look out for Detroit and Philly, but I still give it to Boston. Unless something happens, injuries, or maybe an injury to Tuukka Rask, I see the Bruins taking the Eastern Conference.
Yeah, speaking of another top team in the Eastern Conference, let's look at the Pittsburgh Penguins. We know they had injuries all season long with Pascal Dupuis and Chris Letang. He came back a couple of weeks ago. Do you think they'll ever get it together as far as making a good playoff run, and especially after what happened last year, being the Bears being swept out of the Eastern Conference Finals versus Boston? Do you think they'll ever put it all together?
Well, I think if they don't do it this year, there could be some shakeup in Pittsburgh. I know Sidney Crosby, you've got to look at him as the leader of that team, and he is not going to want to see happen what happened last year. They all have a bad taste in their mouth still from that victory for the Boston Bruins in 4 straight games. So, I think keep an eye on the Pittsburgh Penguins. It's unfortunate they've had the injuries they have, but they've still managed to maintain stamina in the Eastern Conference. I mean, look, they're second behind the Boston Bruins. They still have 107 points, so they're not that far off given the injuries they've had. You mentioned Pascal Dupuis. They're missing Chris Connor. They're missing Marcel Gottsch, Evgeny Malkin, Joe Vitale. Thomas Vokoun has missed the entire season. So their backup goaltender situation has been interesting to watch. But they do have the return of Paul Martin. Chris Letang is back, as you mentioned. I'd like to see him get into full form, which would be great to see given what he's gone through. And they're really well coached. I mean, Dan Bylsma is one of the best coaches there is. And if it's one guy that can get that team ready to go, it's Dan Bylsma. So I think, however, if they don't have a good showing here in the postseason, there will probably be some moving parts in Pittsburgh.
Hi, Kathryn. This is D again. We have quite a few hockey guests on here, and I like to ask them this question. I'd love to get your opinion on this. Do you like the new playoff setup where you have the divisions, the teams in a division going against each other, and then it kind of breaks down to that? And I know it's completely different from what it was last year, and with the new formatting of the league, the Red Wings are now in the Eastern Conference, and it's taking it away from the rivalry between the Chicago Blackhawks. But do you like the new setup?
It took a little getting used to. There's no doubt about that. I think for everybody it did. But watching what panned out in the course of the season and watching the rivalries that developed, I mean, you mentioned Detroit obviously getting pulled away from the Western Conference. You lose out on that rivalry with Chicago on a frequent basis, but they did play twice this season, and those games were great to watch. But you had some new rivalries develop. And I thought that the way the divisions were structured, I mean, look what's happening in the Central right now with Chicago, St. Louis, and Colorado. It's coming down to the final game of the season, and the position is still up for grabs. So that's been really fun to watch, and you've got this new rivalry now with Chicago, St. Louis, Colorado, Boston, Tampa Bay, Montreal. Those are great. Boston and Montreal had the rivalry, but now Tampa Bay's mixed in there with the Atlantic Division in the East. So I think it took a little getting used to, but I like it. I love the wild card spots. I love how we've been watching every single night who's going to get that final wild card spot. And now that they have the wild card spot, where are they going to be jockeying for position? Out west, it's anyone's guess whether Minnesota or Dallas ends up in 7 or 8. And in the East, Columbus, Detroit, they're tied right now with points. There's a very good chance Detroit could leapfrog Columbus. And then you've got the Blue Jackets playing the Bruins. So I think it's fine. I mean, I'm sure fans, didn't like the fact that Detroit moved to the East, and I'm sure Winnipeg fans, might be questioning them out west because that's a tough conference for Winnipeg to have to go into. They've got some work to do for their franchise before they can be competitive in the Western Conference. But it took a little getting used to, and I think everybody's fine with it now, and here we go in the playoffs. We'll see how it pans out in the Stanley Cup Finals.
Hi, Kathryn. This is Sid once again. I wanted to ask you about the NHL Outdoor Series. We had multiple games this year going outdoors. Do you think that there needs to be more than one or two games outside, or do you think they should keep it just to 1 or 2?
Well, I was skeptical. I mean, everybody loves that New Year's Day outdoor game. This year it was unbelievable in Michigan with in the big house with Toronto and Detroit. And I thought, how could the league possibly top this? And then we had the 2 outdoor games at Yankee Stadium. We had the one in L.A., the great game at Soldier Field, which was picturesque, and I mean that was unbelievable to me, that the history and Soldier Field, and to have a game played there, the matchup of Taves and Crosby for the first time ever in their careers. You couldn't have written it better. So I was very skeptical to think, how could you top the New Year's Day? It's the biggest event, on that day in all of sports. And they did. The NHL did with the Stadium Series. So I'm no longer worried about it going forward. I think we'll see probably 4 or 5 Stadium Series games next year as well. I think that it's great for the league. You get fans, I mean, to pack a 60,000 to 118,000 person stadium watching an NHL game, that's huge. And it gets your average fan involved. Somebody who maybe doesn't watch the NHL on a nightly basis watches that game and says, oh, wow, you know what? These guys are really good. It's fun to watch this. So I think that we'll see a lot more games going forward here, and I embrace it. I think it's great for the league. It's great for the players. They all seem to enjoy playing in those games, and you get beautiful pictures for a lifetime. I mean, my gosh, the scenics from that game in Chicago were unbelievable. Shoveling the snow, and the puck would slow down. Duncan Keith tries to pass the puck up the ice, and it goes nowhere because there's 2 inches of snow on the ground. That's a fun game to watch.
Kathryn, before we get out, we'll let you go. Let everybody know where they can find you.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Before we let you go, let everyone know where they can find you.
Oh, that's right. Sorry, I couldn't understand the
not a
question.
problem.
We're on the NHL Network every night.
Okay.
NHL on the Fly begins at 7. I usually get on the set about 9 o'clock for NHL Tonight, and we are on until about 2 in the morning. So it's the NHL Network. I know there's some availability on DirecTV out there in Chicago. I'm not sure what the channel is in Chicago for you guys. And then during the playoffs, I'll be on NBC as well on Sundays and Mondays broadcasting the games.
All right, we appreciate you coming on the Dan Davis Show. But before you go, Sid wanted to make sure we tell you happy belated birthday.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Yes, a big birthday on Wednesday. Thank you.
So listen,
We won't ask you about your age, but
It's okay. I'm 33. I'm not afraid to tell it.
Cool.
Proud.
Lady.
ooh. Listen, Kathryn, we appreciate you coming on. We look forward to talking to you later.
All right, guys. Thanks so much. Take care.
thanks, Kathryn.
And that was Kathryn Tappen of the NHL Network. Again, a good find by Sid. And we'll be right back on the other end of this break to talk a little bit more sports. This is the Dan Davis Show on ChicagolandSportsRadio.com.